trying to find some way to dig himself out of a hole before an election might come up, have decided to do it on the backs of the people who have suffered and died in Tucson, Arizona. There's no reason to improve our gun laws based on something that happened in an entirely different gun culture. Mark Holland will join us in about 45 minutes, and conservatives just wouldn't buy it. And they were right not to buy it, because we've heard that this guy didn't know anything about politics. Just like you can't tie, the Beatles to Charles Manson. So now, in our country, for the liberals to be rubbernecking this tragedy down in the United States and decide to come out with they have this idea that Canada has to tighten up our gun laws. Mayor Thorpe, Dawson College, École Polytechnique. Everybody says, well, Mayor Thorpe would have been prevented. Mayor Thorpe happened when the long gun registry was still around. All of those things would not have been prevented if we had better gun legislation. You take a mad, crazy person who's hell-bent on doing what this guy did, and you have him, can't get a gun? Oh, well, I guess I'm not going to bother. Simply would not happen. There are some who want to bring up laws here in this country. Arizona, folks, you know this. It's entirely different than the reality of guns here in this country. Entirely different. And I think it is distasteful to try to score political points based on something that has absolutely nothing, zero, to do with this country and our gun laws. Liberal Mark Holland joins us right now. He's very generous with his time, as always. He's the Liberal public safety critic. And, Mark, I know you have been talking about this. Michael Ignatieff pointed this out, but it doesn't make any sense to me. It really doesn't.
Well, I think what you heard in the speech from the president last night was two main themes. The first is that there needs to be a toning down of partisanship in the rhetoric. And I think that's less applicable in Canada. I think we've been much better. But I think it's also a chance for us to reflect upon our own words and to choose our words more carefully and to ensure that that we're not devolving into personal attacks.
Yeah. But
I think the second point, though, just quickly, is also to reflect upon the policies that we have in place and to ask whether or not they're sufficient or whether or not we can do a better job. And I think any time we can reflect on that is a good time, as long as we do it in a constructive way, an intelligent way, in a way that honestly is a reflection of what has happened and what might or might not be applicable.
Let me make my point this way. I think the conservatives are trying to scare everybody. The crime rate is awful. The reality it isn't. They're building more prisons. Kevin Page, who is the parliamentary budget chief, says that, the money that they're saying isn't accurate. Even down in the United States, you've got Newt Gingrich writing a piece in the Washington Post saying we've been handling crime the wrong way. We've been too tough on it. It hasn't been working. It's not a deterrent. So the conservatives are trying to scare everybody with their tough on crime stuff. I would suggest that using, Tucson to talk about gun problem that we, for the most part, don't have in this country is another disingenuous argument trying to make a point that doesn't need to be made by you guys.
Well, I think it's certainly fair to say that we have to broach any topic like that very carefully. And I think the example here is to say it's a good opportunity to reflect upon our gun laws and to be glad they're there and to ask whether or not what we have is sufficient and to ask what were the circumstances in Tucson that led to the problems that unfolded there, and what is there anything we can learn from it? And I think as long as it's portrayed in an honest way, in an earnest way, to genuinely trying to search for solutions as opposed to an exploitive way, then I think it's fine. But I could not agree with you more that we have to be extremely cautious here, not to play politics with this. It is not a place for politics. It's not a time for it. and it would be reprehensible to do so.
So why even mention it? Why even say it's time to reflect on our gun laws when our gun laws are, I mean, I would say apples and oranges, but this is grape and watermelon.
Well, I couldn't help. I don't know if you had the same reaction, but as I was listening to the coverage of what happened...
My reaction was, I'm glad we live in Canada.
Well, then that's exactly my point, is that, you look at the discussion there and the fact that somebody can go into a local store and pick up a Glock and get a 36 magazine cartridge and only have, basically a 30-second check on them that's very cursory before they walk out the door, makes you say to yourself, thank goodness we have the gun laws that we do. And you know what? It's not a bad reminder of how important it is to have those gun laws. I think that's an important thing to point out. And in fact, one of the things I've been disturbed about in the conversation that's followed in the United States is there hasn't been a lot of conversations about whether or not that makes sense. I mean, does it make sense for somebody to be able to go into a local store and buy a Glock and have a 36-round cartridge? I mean, so I think that, bringing that up and saying, hey, you know what, we should be proud of the gun laws that we have. Yeah. It reinforces their importance. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, and I think that's a comment, frankly, that could be made in a very nonpartisan, non-exploitive way. I
think, the real problem here is, especially in the States, when it is easier to get a gun than it is to get psychiatric help, then you got a problem. And on that level, we should be talking about, psychiatric help for people who have these issues, and how do we prevent that kind of stuff rather than worrying about problems that we don't have.
Well, and I couldn't agree with you more on the issue of psychology. And when you hear the story of this individual who committed this heinous act in Tucson, he's somebody who started exhibiting serious mental problems when he was in high school, and there was no intervention at that point. And unfortunately, that's a story that happens here too. That we see people who start exhibiting serious mental issues. That people become very concerned about their behavior, and there really isn't any place to send them. And if you talk to police officers across the country, often they'll tell you they have to wait until that person commits a crime before they can do anything to help them.
I agree with you 100%.
And we end up using our prisons to help them. And so I think there's a lot to be learned for Canada in that, and that we've got to do a lot better job of dealing with those that are mentally ill. When we start seeing those problems being identified, we have to take early action, intervene, and make sure there are services to actually make a difference. So that's an important point.
Mark, enjoy your evening. Thank you for your time.
Anytime. Great talking.
Mark Holland, who is the MP for Ajax Pickering. Again, I still think you don't even need to bring it up. Not even close comparison. Final to die is straight ahead than John Tory's live drop.